Well, hello there, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about Dendrobium orchids, and I have two friends here that are so excited. Dendrobium orchids. What do you guys think about Dendrobium orchids? Huh? What do you think? What do you think? Hello there, everyone, and to all of my orchid lovers out there, I thank you so much for tuning in. Now, today we are going to be talking about Dendrobium orchids, and I'm going to be sharing with you some growing tips and just letting you know all about how to care for these wonderful, magnificent plants. Now, the two orchids that I have for you today, one is called the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis, and also the other one is called the Dendrobium nobile. Now, the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis is an actual true dendrobium, not really having anything to do with the Phalaenopsis species, only in the regards to how it blossoms is it really similar to the Phalaenopsis orchid. And also, of course, the formation of the blooms, which of course emulate either butterflies or moths, and that is a special characteristic of the Phalaenopsis orchid. Now, as you can see, the way this Phalaenopsis dendrobium, or shall I say the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis, blooms is that it will first shoot out this spike. And on the spike, you will find buds that will eventually bloom into what you see right here. And where you will find this spike is either at the tip, or they will also grow at the base of a leaf where it conjoins onto the actual stalk of the dendrobium. Now, this dendrobium that I have here, this is actually quite a specimen. It is very, very huge. And the unusual thing about this orchid that actually occurred because the gentleman that I purchased this Dendrobium Phalaenopsis from actually allowed the kikis, which is the baby plantlets off of these orchids. If you look really close, he allowed the actual kiki to mature and grow, never taking it off of its original stalk. And then what eventually happened, of course, is it matured to its full growth, which is this one right here. And then that became an adult plant, and it began to bloom. And if you look closely also, you will find another kiki that he's allowed to grow, and it is also maturing as well, and eventually this will give me a flower spike as well. So as you can see, which I didn't actually know, but as you can see, if you allow the actual kikis to remain on its stalk, it can grow into a full-size plant right there on the stalk. Now, of course, it's going to become top-heavy, because this plant right here is just really huge, and you really have to stake it down. But just as long as you water the aerial roots and make sure it's getting fertilized and watered, it'll do just fine. Now, what I will do eventually is that I will actually, after the blooming stage, because I don't want to harm it in any way or stress it out while it is in bloom, I'm going to actually take the baby kikis off, or no longer babies, but the full-grown plants out, and I will actually give it its own container or home space. Also, another amazing fact about the Dendrobium orchids is the fact that if you have a healthy plant and you take good care of it, it does have a heavy blooming process. It is considered a rebloomer also as well. So just because it's bloomed before or because it loses its leaves does not mean that that cane won't bloom again. And another very interesting thing about these Dendrobium orchids, if you water it quite frequently, or if you hold back from watering it, meaning not watering it so often, you will find that you actually have a little bit of control on whether or not the bumps that are found on the cane will become a actual plantlet or a baby kiki, or if it will become a flower spike. Now, if you want a flower spike, what you would have to do is really hold off from watering it quite frequently, and that has a better chance of it actually becoming a flower spike and blossoming for you. Now, if you want plantlets, what you would have to do is water it often, and that will actually promote a better chance of receiving new plants or baby kikis. Okay, so let's talk about propagation techniques of these Dendrobium orchids. Now, of course, I've already talked to you about the baby kikis that will grow from the stalk. Once it has a healthy amount of aerial roots, you would simply remove them from the stalk, place it in its own pot and medium, and of course it will grow into its own individual plant. Now, another form of propagation, of course, you will find that new growth and baby plantlets will come from the base. And when you find them and they've grown to a healthy growth, you can actually remove and separate them and then again plant them in its own pot. And another technique that is also used to create new plants is taking these canes and actually dividing them. You see the ring? You would divide them in between those rings and take those segments along with sphagnum moss that has soaked in water, and you would take them both and put them in a plastic Ziploc bag and then put it in a humid area. And what that does is it really promotes and encourages little growth or the kikis to come from the actual segments. So definitely a very interesting way to get new plants. Okay, now the Dendrobium nobile, you can see the leaves again are very similar. They're actually waxy as well, but they're a little bit more flimsier than the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis. And what you will find here is the difference between the two is that the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis will actually maintain its leaves throughout. If it's a healthy plant, you should have no problem. It will maintain its leaf throughout its lifetime. Now, the Dendrobium nobile is rather different in that regard. It will actually lose its leaves at some point. Now, again, you can remove them if you wanted to and create baby kikis if you want. Or you can leave them on because quite possibly it can become a rebloomer and actually give you more blooms from the stalk. So definitely your choice. Okay, so what you are looking at right now are actually the buds of the Dendrobium nobile. And of course, as you can see, it is very compact and close to the actual stalk. Rather different than your Dendrobium Phalaenopsis, which again comes from that spike and then has a multitude of blossoms that will bloom off of that spike. Now, what you will also find is that the way that the buds will grow is it will grow on the complete opposite side of where a leaf is. So instead of growing at the base of a leaf, it grows on the opposite side. Here's a leaf and the opposite side. Now, what you will also find is the way that the buds form. You will actually see each segment composed of 2 to 3 buds normally. And the blossoms of the actual Dendrobium nobile are quite different than the blossoms off of the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis. I have found that I like to say that they are so much cuter in the aspect of it's a little bit more compact, and it kind of reminds me of the daffodil shape in a sense. and you will find that the actual petals and the lips of the Nobile is actually a lot softer, more velvety, and kind of fuzzy. So that's definitely a neat characteristic that I love about the Nobile blossoms. And the blossoms of the dendrobiums actually can come in many variations of colors. This is actually your kind of pastel, pinkish, a little bit purple blossom, and of course it has white as well in there. But they can come in the color of complete white to a greenish type of almost lime green. Also, you will find that some will have darker lips, and they can be like a deep, deep purple. But again, a variation of different colors that can be found in these dendrobiums, which of course make these plants so much fun to collect. Now, what's different also about these Dendrobium nobiles is getting these plants to actually create its blooms can be a little bit tricky because there is a certain requirement for the nobiles. The nobiles actually will create its blooms when it starts getting cold, so it definitely needs a cold dormant period. Also, what it requires is that it doesn't get watered too frequently. It needs its rest during the cold season, and it definitely needs to have you draw back on the watering if you want these plants to create their blossoms. So definitely, if it doesn't get the requirements that it wants for it to bloom, it will not give you a blossom. Now, with these Dendrobium orchids, much like other orchids, you have to be really mindful on how much water you give them. A lot of people think because they come from the tropics, they need lots and lots of water, and they overwater it, and then they find that the plant eventually has root rot and sometimes can prove to be fatal for the plant. So definitely a trick and technique to watering these is you can soak them in water, but then allow them to dry. It's good to have a medium that really does not hold and retain a lot of water. Allow it to dry, and when you start feeling that it's drying up to the touch, go ahead and rewater them. But definitely it doesn't have to be filled with water, and it doesn't always have to be wet. Usually when you rewater them, of course, is when it starts getting dry again. And I would really say that you should water them about like twice a week is really all it needs. Now, of course, again, when you have plantlets, and if you plan on keeping the plants on the actual stalk, remember these are aerial roots also, and that they are individual plants. So don't just water here and think that it's okay. You definitely, I have a sprayer here, want to give it a good spray down and make sure that the aerial roots are getting what it needs as well. Okay, so for the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis, this plant is very easy to maintain, and it's really not fussy at all. It likes warm temperature, and it likes bright sun, but of course not direct sunlight. Remember, direct sunlight can really harm your plants and cause it to burn, so you definitely don't want to put your orchids in an area where it's going to receive direct sunlight because it will become damaged. So again, bright light, but not full and direct sunlight. And also, watering the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis is really quite simple. You can water it on a regular basis. Of course, always keeping in mind that once it is dry or starts drying, that's when you can rewater them or should rewater them. But again, not really fussy, regular basis throughout the year. Of course, they do suggest that during the cold season or during the winter season, go ahead and just draw back a little bit on the water. But of course, very easy. Now, the Dendrobium nobile, it's a little bit more fussier. I mean, it's an easy plant too, but if you want to definitely get the well-noted blossoms that it is known for, definitely you are wanting to draw back on the watering during the dormant cold season. Don't water as much. And also remember that this plant has to reach a certain climate. So it has to get pretty cold. I would say starting at the 50 degrees and below, that's when it will start giving you the blossom. But of course, keeping in mind they are still orchids, and orchids do not like freezing temperatures at all, and it can really damage or even, I don't want to say the word, but it can kill your plant. So definitely when it gets cold, like that, freezing temperatures, you want to bring them inside the house or somewhere where it's safe and sound. Okay, so now fertilizing your dendrobium is really completely all up to you. There are some individuals that actually fertilize every time they water their plant, and there are others that really just fertilize sparingly. Now, what I do, because I am such a scaredy cat and I'm afraid to damage my orchids, I just have this feeling that if you over fertilize them, that it will cause damage to the plant. And I just don't want to do that. So I actually will fertilize, I would say every 2 to 3 times I water. And I think that's sufficient, and they've been doing well from me doing that. So definitely if you want to take that tip. But again, it's completely all up to you. Now, an important thing that you really have to note on while it is in blossom, you really should not fertilize the plant while it's blooming. And also, you really don't want to do any major work to the plant itself while in bloom, because you guys have to understand that while it is blossoming, the plant is actually focusing all its energy right here, right on its blooms. So that would mean that the rest of the plant is just a little bit weaker and is more susceptible to being stressed out. So you definitely don't want to put them in any strenuous situation. Don't compromise its safety. Definitely don't want to do any major work during this time. You don't want to do any separation or repotting or, cutting up of the stalks itself. You just kind of want to leave it alone and let it just bloom in all of its magnificence. At this time, just enjoy its beauty, folks. No major work, okay guys? No major work. Okay, folks, so I really enjoyed our time together. Of course, conversating about one of my most favorite things in the whole wide world, which is the orchids. And I thank you that you would take time with me to learn all about these dendrobiums. And I hope some of the information that I have provided you will be useful in your journey through the dendrobium adventure. So I want to ask you guys to please subscribe and please comment or leave any suggestions. And of course, definitely like. Again, I thank you guys so much. Really enjoyed you, and happy orchid collecting, folks. So much fun. And just a quick side note, folks. Unfortunately, this Dendrobium nobile is not in bloom, but this is one of my favorite orchids. So I definitely want to show you exactly what the blooms look like. So please stay tuned. I would say in about 2 weeks, these will be in bloom. So definitely want to show you just how beautiful these are and why these are one of my favorite orchids.